How are y'all doing today? My name is Robby Ballmeyer, and these are my friends, Stuart Wood
Hello, everybody.
and Nato Virto.
What's up?
And this is the Rebuilt Life podcast, helping you rebuild your life with Jesus. Let's talk about what did I just watch. Nato, what do you got for us?
Yeah. So I've been watching Peacemaker. Now, first, I want to put a disclaimer.
Why do all of yours have it? Why do all of yours so far have a disclaimer on them?
I know. It's pretty gory. There's one questionable scene so far at the first episode, towards the middle.
I watched the first episode.
Yeah. But other than that, if you're into over-the-top humor, this is the show for you. I have been legitimately laughing. I'm very interested in the character development, especially. So, if you don't know what Peacemaker is, it's based off of the character who was in the most recent Suicide Squad movie from James Gunn. And they're expanding on this character. And so, when you see him in the movie, he kind of comes off as this character who has everything together and he knows his resolve and he's going to do whatever he's going to do to accomplish that. But when you get to the show, you start to realize that that's just how he presents himself. And really, he has a bunch of, or even one part, one of the characters says they knew that he would come back to be a part of their team because his incessant need for approval from everybody else. So he's constantly trying to prove that he is the superhero that he believes he is. He's not a bad guy, and he's going to save the world. He's going to be the next Superman. He thinks he's better than Superman. He thinks he's better than Batman. I mean, they constantly say that throughout the show. And yeah, I mean, it's a fun time. There's a lot of good music on it. If you like 80s/early 90s rock and roll, very good music on there. As far as how it can relate to spiritual formation is kind of one of the center themes of the show is that he has all this pain and hurt and baggage primarily from his dad. And his dad is just such an awful character. He's just this racist. He's the grand wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, just a horrible person. And his son loves him, but at the same time, he sees that his dad is just a jerk. And he's constantly wrestling with this of trying to show Dad, I'm doing these things for you. Won't you see that I can be great? And his dad just trashes him and constantly puts him down. And so as far as how it relates to spiritual formation is working through when you have that pain and that baggage from whoever, whatever that's happened in your life, and trying to navigate that and understand who am I and who has God called me to be. And similarly, he's who am I? Who has the world called me to be, to save them, to be this great person, whatever. Well, just similar with us, who has God called us to be? What are we trying to accomplish? What are we doing in the midst of all that pain and all that baggage and all that hurt, right? And weeding through it. And so I really identify with his character struggles, not because he's an idiot or anything like that, but because he's a total idiot. But more so just the humanness of it, the brokenness, the pain, and trying to navigate that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other thing I gather from the Peacemaker character, because I did enjoy the Suicide Squad reboot with it, but his character, this is something I've been working through with my spiritual director and also my counselor as well. This idea of expectations meeting reality. That there's times I put all these things on me that I need to do, and I need to be this, and I need to make this happen. But the reality is you're probably not going to be able to live up to that. Instead of and then we always say, okay, lower your expectations. Well, I'm not just lowering my expectations. In this case, I'm letting the expectations meet the reality of what's going on in my life. There are limitations to me. Maybe it's the stage of my life that I'm in, the age that I personally am. Maybe it's just the
Mm,
season I'm in. Like there's limitations that we have that are good, and we should embrace those. And so when you think about a character like Peacemaker, he is trying to live outside of really his limitations. His expectations don't meet reality on
mm,
who he is and what he expects. And because of that, he often finds himself in really bad situations because he just is oblivious sometimes to the world around him. Right.
yes, that's
And
good. Yeah.
that's near the end of episode 1, which is pretty graphic. But you know, he finds himself with a woman, you know, pretty nefarious on that, but he's so oblivious that he doesn't even understand what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think, additionally, I think we can lie to ourselves. We lie to ourselves of who we actually are and what's inside of us. And I think for him, I think he lies to himself about who he really is.
Hmm.
Not that we own it. Like, yeah, I'm a
Absolutely.
jerk, I'm owning it, but like he's not changing who he is. He's trying
Hmm.
to maintain who he is and still be the superhero. And what he doesn't understand is like he can't hold on to that part of him and
Yeah.
still and then arrive where he wants to be, to the level of Superman, or you know,
Yeah.
like in that virtue.
In the original film, one of the most memorable quotes for me is from him, and I think it fits this situation perfectly because the quote, they're talking about, calling him like a bad guy or whatever. He's like, I'm not a bad guy. I'm here for peace. He's like, I don't care how many men, women, and children I have to get, killed to get there. Like, it's just like, that's kind of why you're not on Superman's level, dude. Is because
Yeah.
Superman wouldn't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And even just to ride on the end of what Rob was saying, I think it was last week's episode, but there was a part where he's like, somebody calls him a bully, and he's like, "Hey, I got bullied too." And the reason why he got bullied though is that because he was a bully. He's like, kids are calling me a jerk, telling me that I suck because I'm so mean to them. He's like, that hurt me. That hurt me too. And it's like he just has no clue that
Yeah,
he's this big jerk,
yeah,
and he thinks
yeah,
that he's being victimized, right? Even though he's
yeah.
treating everyone like trash. So yeah, good stuff. Very, very funny. James Gunn is killing it. I was
Yeah.
really worried he was going to pigeonhole himself with kind of because I mean, when you watch Suicide Squad, it's like watching Guardians of the Galaxy, but more gory, right? As far as the style, but it doesn't feel that way at all with the show.
All right, mine I'm bringing is a 8-part series called The Shrink Next Door. It's on Apple TV, and this is actually based off of a podcast from Wondery by the same name, The Shrink Next Door. And I'll just read the description. It says the story of Marty and the therapist who turned his life around, then took it over. When he meets Dr. Ike, Marty just wants to be better at boundaries. Over 30 years, he'll learn all about them and what happens when they get crossed. And so, this is a real life story where, for like 27 or 28 years, this therapist, Dr. Ike, basically took over this guy's life to control it. Some true narcissism here. And this is Will Ferrell and Paul Rudd play the characters, and it's just really well done. It's not a comedy, but it's also not dark either. But like Dr. Ike in real life had Marty cut off his family, start a charity, and Dr. Ike would give all of Marty's money away and meet all these celebrities, and he wanted pictures with them, and had his house in the Hamptons like completely renovated and put his own name on Marty's mailbox. Like held these parties that were insane, and Marty footed the bill the whole time, and he couldn't tell him no. He couldn't figure out how to tell him no. Everybody in his life who would have helped him say no, he cut out. So it's really kind of tragic and heartbreaking. It ends okay, but man, like it's pretty messed up. So I'd recommend the podcast and then also the show
Yeah.
too. It's pretty enthralling.
So I have not watched this movie, but I did read the big article that came out regarding the movie because it's a true story, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There was a big article that came out. I want to say in like 2019. That was I want to say it was in the Atlantic, maybe, but it just laid out this whole story and just how tragic it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, really heartbreaking how this quote unquote therapist totally took advantage of this man, right?
Oh yeah, and he wasn't the only one either. So
Yeah.
So, all right, well, let's move into the topic of this episode, which is deconstruction. Um, we want to talk about deconstruction because really, when we talk about the rebuilt life, like, why do we need to rebuild in the first place? And so there is I don't know if you call it a buzzword right now of something called deconstruction. And so we want to talk about what deconstruction is, what it's not, and maybe some alternatives instead of deconstructing what we do, maybe some, not even alternatives, but some different paths to identify perhaps what you're going through, and that you can hear from us and our stories on what we went through, to better help you through a time where you're trying to figure things out. Um, so when we talk about deconstruction, let me first, just for us, clarify what it's not. Um, that deconstruction in and of itself, it does not necessitate reconstruction. So once something's torn down, we don't have to build it out. And I've often said that there's no glory in deconstruction, and that we could say, oh, I'm deconstructing to build something better. And so I would say, like, it does not necessitate us building something back once we're tearing down. So let's talk about actually what we're tearing down in this regard. And so, how do we define it? So I would define it, that it is the dismantling or reduction of a prior held belief system. Really, it's the answer to a question that we have of, why isn't this working the way that I would expect it to work? Nato, specifically, like, for you, how would you, maybe in your own words, like, how would you define deconstruction through some of your walk?
Deconstruction, as far as my own personal definition, would be to to essentially challenge the things that you previously held and tear those things down, and while tearing them down, actually analyzing why you are tearing them down. um, I think that as of late, a lot of people that have begun to deconstruct are doing more so because of a cultural reason. I'm not saying that doesn't mean it's legit. I'm just saying that because of they're frustrated with political agendas or things like that, whatever, then they started their deconstruction journey. Whereas there's, as far as the sociology behind it, there's people who began their deconstruction process primarily as a theological, but that was the, like, kind of the initial wave, and now that we're kind of in this newer wave where it's become more of like because of sociological reasons. So that being said, for me, it was, when I went through my deconstruction, it was more of a theological reason. When I met Rob, I was at an evangelical seminary, but I was seeking to become Catholic. So I was deconstructing my evangelical beliefs and looking into the Catholic Church and trying to find out why there are these differences of perspectives and opinions between traditions, and trying to find something within that as I was tearing things down. So, yeah, I don't know if that really answers your question, but yeah, that's a summary, I guess, of my experience.
I think it's great, and I think, it, and I think it becomes a buzzword, hot topic type thing where, and I know Matt Chandler recently said, like, it's deconstruction is sexy, that's why people are doing it, and other people have gotten in trouble for almost minimalizing or trivializing what deconstruction actually is, and we certainly don't want to do that. But I think to understand what it is, we need to understand where it came from, and specifically around the turn of the century, 1800s into the 1900s, arose a scholarly field called literary criticism. And what literary criticism would do would be is breaking down something into smaller parts to see how it relates to the whole. And so this is where we get the idea of literary genres and form and structure and things like that. Well, the Bible in this time was not exempt from getting placed underneath this lens of literary criticism. In fact, it is still a discipline that is practiced. I mean, you can go get a PhD in biblical criticism. And so even the New Testament, Greek New Testaments, will have a literary, call it an apparatus at the bottom that has all the different manuscripts that this verse was found in and all the ones this one's found in. And I think what it has done is has exposed a world where we believe it exposes some of our misconceptions and beliefs of how the Bible came together, how the Bible actually was given to authors, how it was written, how it was maintained over the centuries, and therefore how we have it in our form. And the reality is that my shiny NIV that's sitting next to me on my table here did not just drop out of the sky as is, and that we don't understand that. And I was just talking about this in my life group just today, that do you guys remember? Did you ever watch the show Hero or Heroes? You remember that? They all
Not
like
familiar with it.
okay, so it was like a TV show on for a while, maybe 10 years ago or so. And everybody got these superpowers. Not everybody, a few people got superpowers, but there was one guy that was going around like killing everybody, Siler, and he was going around, it was Zachary Quinto before he was famous, and he was going around killing people and stealing their powers. That was his power, is to steal other people's powers. So but there was one guy who saw him coming, and he was a painter, and he'd go into these visions and his eyeballs would turn white, and then he would like be this comic book artist painter, and he'd paint all these futuristic scenes that would come to pass, and then he'd come out and go, what did I just draw? Oh no, and I think people honestly think they think that's how the Bible happened, that I went and wrote the Bible and my eyes rolled in the back of my head and they turned white and the Holy Spirit spoke to me and I woke up and I went, oh wow, scripture. And it's just, that's just not how it happened. And that there was a partnership of the Spirit of God with a person writing. And so literary criticism confronts all of that for us, and it's not something to ignore, but what it's done is it exposed us for what we take for granted and what we know or don't know. And so we think that breaking down something becomes a bad thing. And I remember after preaching 10 years ago or so, one Sunday morning, a little old lady came up to me and she assured me that Bible college was leading me away from the Bible. And she wanted me to know that after my sermon. And I don't remember what the topic was or any, I just remember her saying that. And I think that's where a lot of people think that if I have doubts, if I want to explore my faith, if I distrust, then I'm actually rejecting Jesus and he won't accept me or I don't accept him anymore. And so we quite literally throw the baby out with the bathwater when we talk about deconstruction. Um, and so I thought it was really helpful over on Mike Erre's podcast with Tim Stafford, Voxology podcast. Highly recommend Voxology podcast. Maybe one day I'll get to interview Mike. That'd be cool. But he recently had Joshua Ryan Butler, and Butler had an article that was written for the Gospel Coalition about 4 causes of deconstruction and then some alternatives to it. And he got some flack a little bit on that. We can talk a little bit about that article, but I really liked what he said, and he had a friend that made this distinction about deconstruction. He says there's really 2 types of deconstruction that we see in scripture. And one is found in Genesis, and you have the serpent saying, did God really say? And so we take that and we like, did God really say this about, I don't know, my money, my sexuality, my lifestyle, my whatever? Did God actually really say that? And then that's the first type. The second type of deconstruction is Jesus, where he is saying on the Sermon on the Mount, he says, you've heard it said, but I tell you. And what he's actually doing in this is he is reorienting and calling into what they initially believed to set them on a right path. So really, deconstruction is about dismantling belief systems that you once held. So either way, did God really say that? Now I'm dismantling that. You've heard it said, but I tell you, now I'm dismantling that. But I think the question lies like, why am I tearing this down? And I think really here's the rub. Like, I may not always know why I'm tearing it down, why I'm going through it. I just don't. And so I can't see it or assess it like through the windshield. I can only see it through the rear view mirror of my life. It's kind of like you're driving and you see that bunny that's about to run in front of your car and you can't stop and you can't swerve and you just right. And you didn't see it coming through that windshield, but you look back in the rear view mirror and you just see the thing head over tails, flopping along. Right. True story. But
Poor
if,
thing.
yeah, right. So if you see that,
Murderer!
yes, true. But we can't see things. And I think sometimes we think like, oh, I'm supposed to be able to see everything coming, and we just can't sometimes. Stu, so when we talk about kind of dismantling our belief systems, I mean, that can be good or bad. Why don't you share a little bit about kind of your upbringing with Catholicism and what that looks like?
Yeah, so I was raised Catholic and attended Catholic schools all the way through 8th grade. And it was one of those things where I didn't really, uh, I didn't feel like I knew God existed. Beyond that, I wasn't really like into the church. I wasn't into, especially all the practices, the dogmatic stuff, especially. It was just like, you know, boring. It was like a chore to me almost. And then I started attending an evangelical high school, non-denominational high school, and through all that time, like I began to dismantle what my upbringing was, and to really challenge myself. So like just like praying to saints, it was just like one of those things where it's just like I can't, where in the Bible does it say that like I should be praying to this dude, you know, that the Catholic Church is upholding into this position higher than just being a person. It's not there for me. And then it's one of those things. It's just like um, the virgin birth. I kind of struggled at that for a moment. And I was just like, like how, right? It doesn't make sense to me.
Do you mean Mary giving birth to Jesus, or do you mean the Immaculate Conception of Mary being
The
born
Immaculate
sinless?
Conception of Mary, yeah,
Got it.
and that's really what it was. I was just kind of like, but it's one of those things where it's just like I knew God existed. I didn't really have a connection, and I was looking for that connection to my Creator. And by challenging all those things that I was honestly struggling with, at a very you know a turning point of my life. Probably one of the major first turning points of anybody's life is that transition between like middle school and high school, where your identity can change, especially moving into a new school where nobody knows you. Like, all right, do I believe this? What do I believe? So I just began to challenge it, and through high school, going into an evangelical high school, that those people in my life answered the questions that I had, or at least tried to, or at least had the honesty to tell me, like, I don't know, man. Like, I really don't. And I could accept that, like it's one of those things where, you know, if they don't have all the answers, it's fine, because we don't all have all the answers, and I kind of knew that back then, but, it's one of those things like at least they have the honesty to tell me I don't know.
I think that that's a really good point as far as people identifying that they might not know the answers, because from my experience in evangelicalism, and I'm sure you guys would also feel this way, um, I was often taught, maybe this is just a guess, but I feel about 80%, maybe 90% of the time, that all the answers are in the Bible. And if you just study it and know it, you will find those answers. Um, but the more time I spent in Bible college, the more time I spent on my own personal study, the more time I spent once I got to seminary, you start to realize that uh, the Bible isn't always so clear on some of those things that we're always told are very clear. especially when you start doing the historical digging. You start looking to see, like, what were the Jewish teachers teaching at this time, and why would Jesus say this, and how come they used this specific language, and how does it tie into things that were being taught at the time, and blah, like the list goes on, and it just becomes a snowball. And so I think that a lot of people that I know, and even from my experience, went through deconstruction because we had been told you will find the answer, all these answers that you're looking for, and then it becomes clear that you're not going to find all those answers. Um, and then here's where the problem comes, right? So it's not so much that you come to this realization, oh, I won't find these answers, but then it's the church teachers that are out there who say, no, you need to stick with it because you will find these answers. And then these people start to crumble because they're trying to find these answers and they're not finding them. Um, and I think that as far as on the church's side, it has not done a great job at how to address people who are um, having these crises of faith. And as a result, you then have these people who leave and then they become militant against the church, right? Because they say, these guys lied to me, this, that, and the other, whatever. So I think it's just really important to be able to say, I don't know. And that's a question that people have been wrestling with through all of church history, whatever the question may be, or whatever. Instead of trying to make it seem like, from some weird fundamentalist perspective, that you can have all these answers if you just read the Bible, whatever. That's very Gnostic, really, if you think about it at the end of the day, right? You just read the scriptures and you will understand this hidden truth. Well, it's not that simple or that easy.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And I don't know why more Christian leaders, and myself speaking as one, can't say, man, we just don't know. I think there's a lot of insecurity. I think if we say, I don't know, then we think, oh, we're leading people astray.
Mm-hmm.
But it just takes some humility to say, I don't know, but let's figure it out together.
Mm-hmm.
And let's not abandon this. So why do people deconstruct? I think there's a lot of things and reasons why, as we talk about, kind of, Stu, for you, your maybe disillusionment of man, that doesn't make sense, I got to figure this out. And Nato, I think, it sounds like for some of you, maybe even distrust that gets built there. I found it really interesting. Another plug for Mike Erre, like, he had a list of 6 categories that he said were like other than deconstruction, but I just find it interesting. So he mentions disillusionment, which we talked about. He mentioned that it could be discipleship, could be deconversion, redefinition, doubt, or disorientation. And Nato, you probably fell under doubt, for that. And I think the 2 that are most concerning on this list for me really come down to deconversion and redefinition. So that deconversion, like, tears down to me with no intention of rebuilding. And then we'd be like, oh, we're not going to rebuild back the faith, and we're not building back anything. Well, you actually are. You're always going to rebuild something back.
Mm-hmm.
It may just be something less than, and it doesn't look like anything you once had.
Mm-hmm.
This where we have the rise of the nuns, None, right? What religion are you? None. And mark that on surveys and census, and it's just, I'm a nun. I don't believe anything. It was interesting. They
I'm a
were
priest.
recent. Is that what? Yeah, in the Jedi Order, right? They were recently tearing down a building in Las Vegas, and they were having to. Normally, what we just set charges around a building and we implode it and it falls down on itself. But that is just destruction, right? And I really view that as deconversion. Like, it's just destruction. It doesn't care
Mm-hmm.
about who's around it, doesn't care about taking out anybody with it. It just falls away. And I think you see a lot of Christian celebrities, will put air quotes around that, this is what they're doing. We are just deconverting. Come follow us. And recently, one pastor was offering a whole course on deconstruction. He was charging almost $300, and you can learn how to deconstruct like me. And I just find it so ironic, because the reality is that you once taught me to follow Jesus, and I followed you for that. Now you're telling me that's a bunch of bullcrap, and so now I'm supposed to follow you this, but you're going to charge me more than you ever did for me to follow Jesus.
The
So
ultimate grift.
yeah, like I just like, why should I listen to you? And so like, like you can't even stick with it. So why should I listen to you now on that? And
Mm,
so like, so the buildings imploding on each other. But the thing is like, that's just destruction. Deconstruction is this act of, if they're trying to dismantle a building in Vegas because they're so packed into together, they will actually take panels off the building one at a time and lower them down by a crane and then take them away and destroy them. And because
mm-hmm.
they don't want to hurt the buildings around. And so like, deconstruction isn't necessarily a bad thing. But it's all about what you want to build back.
Yeah.
And so I guess let me ask Nato, like, do you think deconstruction's normal, necessary? Do you think everybody would go through it at some point, or do you think it could be avoided, like from the beginning?
I don't think it could be avoided per se, because, like, in my situation, I never intended to deconstruct. Just things were happening in my life in the midst of me studying that started to coincide and caused essentially the implosion of the building, right? That I didn't want. In fact, and I'll even throw this out there for any of your listeners who might be thinking like, "Oh God, why are they talking about this?" Those people that left, they were never really a part or whatever. Well, so studies have actually been done. I would have to find the links to these things, and we could put them in the show notes, hopefully. But there actually have been studies that have been done where they've surveyed these people who have left Christianity, and they've actually found that these people tended to be the most invested. They gave the most time, they gave the most money, they were present the most, they were willing to do anything and everything as a part of their church that they were a part of, their churches, whatever, the organization. So it's not so much that people just are like, screw this. That probably does happen. But the greater percentage of people, it's like they were trying their hardest to weed through that stuff. And because of social situations and circumstances and trauma and pain, as well as scripture study and having so many questions, it just kind of happens. And I'm reminded of, I think you read Jonathan Haidt's book, right? The what the heck is it called? The one about the elephant? The Righteous Mind. There we go.
Yeah, The Righteous Mind.
Yeah, and
Are you
his
talking
whole,
about the rider and the elephant?
yeah, the rider and the
That's what
elephant,
I
right?
just referenced that this morning. You may talk about what that is.
Yeah, so I mean, his whole concept is that we've always understood that we just can make choices and we just do them, and that's just how we do things in life. But as they've studied the human brain more, they found that that's just not exactly true. And so he uses this metaphor of a giant elephant that we are sitting on top of and riding. And so the elephant's going to do what it will while we're riding it, and we can kind of nudge it, but we can't really control it like we would a horse, right? It's going to go in the direction that it's going, and it's because of our social upbringing and the things that we've experienced in life, our cultural upbringing, et cetera, et cetera. It's like all these factors that just play in. And so we just have to be mindful that we are not always going to be able to control, not always, we'll never be able to control what we're processing and going through, because it just happens to us. And so I guess within that is, hopefully we have people in the community and those around us who can help guide that elephant, right? And and even then, those who are guiding us still recognizing that you don't have, it's okay to doubt, and them telling us that, right? It's okay to have these doubts, it's okay to be uncertain, it's okay to not have these answers. And even if you're like, evangelicalism isn't doing it for me, then go look at Catholicism, go look at Eastern Orthodox, go look at Coptic, I don't know, but try to figure out like where at in these traditions instead of just narrowly looking at evangelicalism and saying, oh, it's all bogus, and then you walk away from it. um, and that's even something that frustrates me with some of these guys that come out like Matt Chandler and stuff, where they're like, oh well, they don't believe this stuff anymore, so obviously they're not really a part of us, but they don't ever present the other options that are out there. And that was something that really helped me, of seeing like I don't need to be Catholic, but there's stuff from the Catholic Church that they do teach that I love, and there's stuff from Eastern Orthodox that I love, and trying to figure out a way to bring it together. So
Yeah, and for me, like right beliefs are really important. Like, I mean, I
mhm.
went to grad school for it, undergrad. Like, that's really important to me. But and I remember like being introduced to some of the spiritual formation stuff, and there was Catholicism this, and it was like oh what because I was told that was all bad.
Mhm.
And there's some redemptive parts in it, and so it's figuring that out. Yeah, I think Jonathan Haidt, The Righteous Mind, and we'll link to it in the show notes. He breaks down that rider and elephant, which I was just talking about this morning, which is really funny. That the elephant is emotion, and the rider is reason, and that
Mhm.
reason we'd like to think is always in charge, but it's not. Emotion is, and
Mhm.
so when we get into a situation uh, potentially the elephant is just running into the marketplace and destroying everything, and there's nothing the rider can do. That
Mhm.
we know I shouldn't do this. And unfortunately, I think as a pastor, a lot of times the way I've even approached things with people that come to me that are deconstructing is to talk about reason. And I think that's even how like the field of apologetics has gotten so big. If I just had
Enough
we
reason,
quote
yes.
yeah, I quote Peter, like always give a reason for your faith. Was that really what he meant? That I should have, four reasons for the belief for God, and
Mhm.
and you're an idiot if you don't believe it otherwise. Like, no, like that.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't think that's what he's like, be able to get a defense. Like, sweet, I want to fight somebody. Let's go. I'm gonna win an
Yeah.
argument. That's what my degree gave me, is the ability to win arguments and
Mhm.
alienate people. Cool.
Yeah.
So um I just think it's really important that, so we could say like, I think it's important for people to know deconstruction is not only a normal, it is necessary, because there are things that you believe that are not in the Bible.
Yeah.
You've encountered them before where you've had a crisis of faith, even after, you know, going to Bible college and everything else. I've experienced, because we've talked about this before, right? Like people in their walks, trying to grow closer to God are going to have those crises of faith that are going to call into question certain things in their life. And being able, to ask those questions and being able to, pull it apart, deconstruct it, analyze, like you said, Nato, just analyze this or analyze that, and really examine it, thoroughly is, yeah, absolutely vitally important. What you were saying, Rob, is, you know, a necessary function of our faith, I think.
One thing too, I do want to highlight is the church hurt suffering element that coincides with oftentimes with deconstruction. I was in the you mentioned the article from what's his name from the Gospel Coalition. I was
Yeah,
actually
from
really
Butler. Yeah.
frustrated with his first point, because he's like, "Hey, you went through church hurt. Here's your solution. Go cry about it." I mean, he used the word lament, but he's basically saying like, "Go wallow in your pain." And I know like he means more than that, but the truth is like I tried to do that, right? I tried to embrace my suffering, and how did that coincide with the suffering of Jesus? But it doesn't fix the problem. I wish in the article he would have said, yes, experience your pain and suffering, but also seek help. And in my case, I went to a Christian therapist, and actually, as we were processing through these things, and I don't know if I mentioned this on the last episode, but so I used to be married and I was going through a divorce. So my deconstruction and my divorce, and also my church treating me like crap, all just like culminated in this one thing at the same time. And so I was just going through a lot. And when I would walk into a church, and I'm somebody who I'm certified in behaviorism, and so Um, I know that these studies are true, but like when we encounter something that's traumatic, oftentimes we can be around something that triggers us and it can cause anxiety or whatever. Um, and so I would walk into a church and I would just feel like the crushing weight of helplessness and despair. And I eventually did get an anxiety diagnosis because of it. And so my therapist had to tell me, I think, and I'm sure somebody on this pod who's listening might disagree with this, but she was like, I think you need to distance yourself from the church right now because you're not able to process it. No, now that doesn't mean I distance myself from people, right? But actually going into a building and hearing these songs and stuff, it was triggering me. And so I had to remove myself for a time. And once I got to that place of healing, I was able to go back. And I know that's not everyone's story, but that was mine.
Well, I think that's an important distinction to make is that, you had to step away from the church. You didn't step away from God, right? You didn't say, I'm done with this. You said, I have to step away from the thing that actually, was a part of the hurt, which, obviously growing up Catholic and knowing what has gone on within the Catholic hierarchy, like there is a lot of hurt out there, and it's happened not just in the Catholic churches, but in evangelical churches and Presbyterian churches and Baptist churches and everywhere else, all around the world. But I think that, like I said, the important distinction to make is that you didn't step away from, your belief in God necessarily, but you did have to step away from the church, something that actually caused you pain. From there you moved on into, your place of healing, and then being able to reconstruct something out of that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so the topic of deconstruction really, it's like a it's like a minefield, right? Like you're walking and somebody can say, well, that's not why I'm deconstructing. I'm deconstructing because of this. And you never know. And that's what we're talking about. We can't see it coming. We can only see it in the rearview mirror. And so we really want to be sensitive to this. And that's why we want to take our time. And so as we talk about this, and so we're actually going to dedicate another episode to what deconstruction looks like, what it is, and also what it might not be. You might not actually be deconverting. It might be something completely different. And I want to give you some other options for what God might be trying to do, and then hopefully give you some hope in that as well. And then we're going to share a little bit. I'll share a little bit of my story on deconstruction because I was deconstructing and didn't even realize I was deconstructing. I was spiraling out, completely spiraling out because I was disillusioned. I thought God wanted me to do this, and all of a sudden it was taken away from me. And then I thought God wanted me to do this, and then all of a sudden found myself in some scandalous stuff happening, and was kind of left sitting in the ashes of it. And but I'm still holding on, and I'm still holding on to Jesus. I'm still holding on to scriptures. I'm still holding on to the community of people around me that are spurring me on to follow after Jesus. And so, man, we'd love to hear from you. If you have some things you want to say, man, please email us at hello@rebuilt.life, and we would and we'd love to connect with you and help walk through and give you some resources. We'll put some in the show notes for this. If you're listening and this has been helpful or you're enjoying the conversation, we would love a review on iTunes. It helps other people like you find this, that hopefully they can have hope through rebuilding a life around the way of Jesus. And so, again, we're going to come out with another episode soon, talking and breaking deconstruction down for what it might be, something else. But until then, we'll see you next time.